The helicopter thundered low over the rooftops of Mogadishu, the wind from its rotors kicking up clouds of dust and debris from the crowded streets below. Inside, Master Sergeant Gary Gordon, a Delta Force sniper, scanned the chaotic city through the scope of his M14. It was October 3, 1993, and the mission had started as a simple snatch and grab, captured two of warlord Mohammed Farah Aidid's top lieutenants. But like so many plans, it had unraveled in a storm of rocket-propelled grenades and automatic weapons fire. From his perch in the lead helicopter, Gordon had a sniper's view of the entire battle space. He watched as the assault team from Task Force Ranger stormed the target building and successfully captured the suspects. For a moment, it seemed like the operation might actually go according to plan. But then the tide turned. A Black Hawk helicopter, call sign Super 6-1, was struck by an RPG. The helicopter spun wildly out of control before crashing somewhere deep in the city's most dangerous neighborhood. Gordon felt his stomach drop as he saw the smoke plume rise from the crash site. He knew the men on that helicopter. He knew they were in trouble. As his own helicopter circled above the city, the gravity of the situation became clear. The ground convoy, already fighting its way through the maze-like streets, was taking heavy casualties and could not reach the downed aircrew. Somali militia and armed civilians were already swarming toward the crash site from every direction, drawn by the promise of victory over the American invaders. From his altitude, Gordon could see the masses of people converging, and he knew the downed pilots and crew were sitting ducks. They were alone, injured, and completely surrounded by an enemy that grew more numerous by the second. Gordon looked at his spotter and fellow sniper, Sergeant First Class Randy Shughart. No words were needed. They had trained together for years, and their bond was deeper than brotherhood. They both understood the math. The men on the ground had no chance without help. Gordon keyed his radio and made a request to the command helicopter, call sign Super 6-2. He asked to be inserted at the crash site to protect the downed crew. The response was immediate and firm. Negative. The area is too hot. The risk was too great, and they couldn't afford to lose another helicopter or two more men. But Gordon could not shake the image of his comrades trapped and fighting for their lives. And he looked at the smoke rising from the wreckage and radioed again. Again, he was denied. The pilots overhead could see the size of the mob forming around the site. Putting two snipers on the ground would be like dropping them into a volcano. But Gordon was insistent. He made a third request, his voice calm but filled with an urgency that could not be ignored. He explained that he and Shughart were prepared to fight their way to the wreckage. They understood the risks. They knew they might not make it out, but the men on the ground deserved a fighting chance. Finally, the commander on Super 6-2 relented. Roger, you can go in. The pilot of the MH-6 Little Bird, the small insertion helicopter, looked back at the two snipers. In his mind, no one in their right mind would volunteer for this. It was a suicide mission. But Gordon and Shughart checked their weapons, a sniper rifle and a pistol each, and prepared to descend into hell. As the Little Bird hovered over a dusty intersection, the two men fast roped down and immediately took cover behind a crumbling wall. The helicopter pulled away, leaving them alone in the most hostile neighborhood in Mogadishu, hundreds of meters away from their objective, with thousands of enemies closing in. The moment Gordon's boots hit the ground, the mission changed from observation to survival. He and Shughart moved quickly, using their advanced training to navigate through the labyrinth of shanties and narrow alleyways. The air was thick with dust and the acrid smell of gunpowder. Somali militia, firing from windows and behind walls, immediately engaged them. The two snipers moved in perfect sync, covering each other as they fought their way toward the downed helicopter. Gordon would lay down precise, suppressing fire with his rifle, allowing Shughart to dash to the next piece of cover, and then they would switch roles. They were outnumbered by hundreds to one, but they moved with a speed and precision that the undisciplined militia could not match. After a brutal fight through the streets, they finally reached the wreckage of Super 6-1. The helicopter lay on its side, a twisted wreck of metal. Inside and around it were the crew members. The pilot, Chief Warrant Officer Mike Durant, was still alive but badly injured, his back broken and his legs shattered. The other crew members, Bill Cleveland, Ray Frank, and Tommy Field, were already dead from the impact or from the ground fire that had raked the helicopter as it fell. Gordon and Shughart pulled Durant from the wreckage, dragging him to a relative position of cover behind the helicopter's fuselage. They formed a small, desperate perimeter, with the two snipers placing themselves between the wounded pilot and the sea of attackers. From his position, Gordon used his long-range rifle to devastating effect. Every time a group of militia tried to rush the position, a single, precise shot would drop the lead man, forcing the others to scatter. He was a wall of lead and steel, holding back an army. Shughart fought on the other side, his rifle barking as he kept the enemy from flanking them. But for every fighter they killed, two more seemed to take his place. The volume of fire directed at their position was immense. Bullets pinged off the helicopter's metal frame and kicked up dirt all around them. Gordon knew they were running out of time and ammunition. He made a desperate move, darting back to the wreckage to retrieve weapons and ammunition from the dead crew members. He tossed a rifle and some magazines to Shughart and then returned to the pilot. He handed Durant a survival radio and told him to call for help, telling him to keep firing no matter what. The situation grew more dire with each passing minute. A bullet struck Shughart, mortally wounding him. Gordon saw his best friend fall, but he could not stop. He continued to fire, his movements mechanical, driven by sheer willpower. He then took a round himself, but he kept fighting. Finally, Gordon's rifle clicked empty. He had nothing left for his primary weapon. He looked at Durant, the injured pilot. Gordon crawled back to the wreckage one last time, emerging with an M16 rifle. He knew he didn't have the strength left to fight much longer. He slid the weapon over to Durant, along with his last 5 rounds of ammunition. He looked the pilot in the eye and said 2 simple words: "Good luck." Then, armed only with his pistol, Master Sergeant Gary Ivan Gordon turned to face the enemy one final time. He continued to fire until he was fatally wounded, his body shielding the downed pilot he had volunteered to save. When the news of the firefight in Mogadishu finally reached the United States, it landed like a thunderclap in the small, quiet town of Lincoln, Maine. This was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, a community of dense forests and close-knit families. Gary Gordon had grown up here, hunting in the woods and learning the values of hard work and integrity that defined the town. The telegram informing his family of his death was a devastating blow that echoed through every street and household. His wife, Carmen, and his children were left to grapple with a loss that was as profound as it was public. In the days and weeks that followed, the story of what had happened on that dusty street in Somalia began to emerge. It came in fragments, radio transmissions, debriefings from soldiers who had survived, and eventually, the official investigation. The military pieced together the final moments of the battle, and the extraordinary courage of Gordon and Shughart became a legend. They had not just fought bravely, they had made a choice. They had looked at impossible odds, and instead of accepting the fate of their comrades, they had volunteered to share it. The pilot they protected, Mike Durant, survived. He was captured and held for 11 days, but he lived, and he lived because 2 men he barely knew had decided his life was worth more than their own. Back in Lincoln, the community rallied around the Gordon family, but their grief was a private, heavy burden. They received letters and calls from across the country, but no words could fill the void left by a husband and father. Carmen Gordon knew that her husband had died doing what he believed was right. He was a soldier who lived by a code, a man who took the phrase, "Leave no one behind," not as a slogan, but as a sacred promise. The full scope of his actions, the 3 requests to go down, the final stand, and the last words to the pilot. and painted a picture of a man whose courage was so absolute that it transcended the normal bounds of human fear. Nearly 8 months later, on a spring day in 1994, Carmen Gordon and her children stood in the East Room of the White House. President Bill Clinton stood before them, holding the small blue ribbon from which hung the sky-blue star-spangled medal, the Medal of Honor. The citation was read aloud, its words filling the room with the stark, brutal poetry of that day in Mogadishu. As the president placed the medal around Carmen's neck, the room was silent. It was the nation's highest military honor, a token of thanks from a grateful country. For the Gordons, it was a reminder of the man who would not be coming home. It was a symbol of a sacrifice so immense that a piece of metal and ribbon could never fully capture it. Years passed, and the world largely moved on from the battle in Mogadishu. The story was told in books and eventually in a major Hollywood film, Black Hawk Down, which introduced a new generation to the heroism of Gordon and Shugart. In the movie, Gordon was portrayed by actor Nikolai Coster-Waldau, bringing his face and his story to screens around the globe. For the Gordon family, seeing the story told was a strange and bittersweet experience. It was validation that the world remembered, but it also reopened wounds that had barely healed. In Lincoln, Maine, the memory of Gary Gordon never faded. He remained a son of the town, a local boy who had grown up to become an American hero. Then, in the summer of 2021, nearly 3 decades after that fateful day, the town of Lincoln prepared to do something special. And they had raised money and commissioned a statue, a permanent monument to ensure that Gary Gordon's courage would never be forgotten by the generations to come. The statue was crafted in bronze, depicting Gordon in his battle gear, holding his sniper rifle, his eyes scanning the horizon with the watchful gaze of a protector. It was placed in a prominent spot in the town, a place of honor where people could come to pay their respects. The dedication ceremony was held on a warm August day. The town turned out in force, old friends, fellow veterans, community leaders, and curious children who had only heard the stories. Senator Susan Collins of Maine attended, speaking of the integrity and devotion to duty that had been forged in the very soil of that community. Retired Colonel Ron Russell, a veteran of the battle, I spoke about what Gordon had done, reminding everyone that the pilot who inserted him said no one in their right mind would have asked to do that. But Gordon had asked, not once, but 3 times, driven by a creed that said, "I will never fail my comrades." But the most powerful moment came when a frail, older man approached the podium. It was Mike Durant, the man Gordon had died trying to save. His presence was living proof of Gordon's sacrifice. He looked at the statue, a perfect likeness of the man who had given him his last 5 bullets, and wished him luck. Durant, a native of Berlin, New Hampshire, stood before the people of Lincoln as a living testament to their hometown hero. He was there to say thank you, not on behalf of a grateful nation, but on behalf of himself, a man who owed his very life to Gary Gordon's courage. The statue was unveiled, and for a moment, Gordon stood watch over his hometown once more, frozen in bronze, a silent guardian for the ages. The dedication of the statue in Lincoln was a moment of closure for many, but for those who truly understand the life of a special operator, Gary Gordon's story didn't end on the streets of Mogadishu or with the unveiling of a bronze monument. It lives on in the men and women who continue to volunteer for the toughest assignments, who train in the same woods and fields where Gordon once learned his craft. His legacy is not just a medal or a statue. It is a standard of selflessness that challenges every soldier who follows in his footsteps. In the annals of military history, Gordon's actions on October 3, 1993, stand as a singular example of what the word brotherhood truly means. The creed of the Ranger and the Special Forces soldier speaks of never failing a comrade. Most soldiers interpret that as doing their job well, fighting hard, and watching the man next to them. Gary Gordon interpreted it literally. He heard the call for help, and when he was told it was too dangerous, he asked again, and again. He didn't calculate the odds of survival. He calculated the odds of his friend's survival if he didn't go. He decided that his life was a fair trade for theirs. That is a level of commitment that is almost impossible for the average person to comprehend. It is the purest form of love a warrior can show. His final act, handing Durant the last rifle and those 5 precious rounds, was not the act of a man trying to survive. It was the act of a man who had already made peace with his fate. He was buying time, giving the pilot a tool to fight with, and in doing so, giving him a sliver of a chance. Gordon then stood up with his pistol to face an armed mob. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and out of options, but he never stopped fighting. That is the image that should be remembered. A single American soldier standing his ground, refusing to yield, embodying the very best of his nation. Today, when young soldiers study the Battle of Mogadishu, they learn about tactical mistakes and heroic stands. But above all, they learn about Gary Gordon and Randy Shugart. They learn that heroism is a choice. It is a choice made in an instant, but it is built on a lifetime of discipline, values, and love for one's country and one's brothers. The 6 parts of this story, from the desperate requests in the helicopter to the bronze statue in a small Maine town, form a complete circle of sacrifice and remembrance. Gordon's life was not taken from him in Somalia. It was given freely, a gift to his comrades and to the nation he served. And in that giving, he achieved a form of immortality. For the Gordon family, the story is also deeply personal, and it extends beyond the battlefield. Carmen Gordon, who accepted the Medal of Honor on that day in 1994, carried the weight of that day for the rest of her life. She raised her children with the knowledge that their father was a hero, not just because of how he died, but because of how he lived. The Gary Gordon they remembered was a man who loved the outdoors, who was dedicated to his family, and who approached every challenge with a quiet determination. The Medal of Honor, now displayed in museums and remembered in history books, is a piece of their family history, a tangible link to a man they lost too soon. The statue in Lincoln serves as a gathering place, not just for reflection, but for education. School children visit on field trips and veterans stop by on Memorial Day. They read the inscription and learn the story of the local boy who became a legend. They learn about the operation in Somalia, the crash of the Black Hawk, and the 2 snipers who chose to descend into hell. The statue ensures that Gary Gordon's face is not just a photograph in a history book, but a presence in the community, watching over the town that shaped him. In the end, the story of "she's gone, they left the SEAL sniper behind" is a misnomer, as Gary Gordon was a Delta Force operator, not a Navy SEAL, and he was never left behind. He deliberately went forward. But the core of the title speaks a deeper truth. He returned for his brothers, carrying them not on his back but in his heart. He fought and died to protect 4 Rangers and aircrew, ensuring that at least one would live to tell the tale. His was a mission of mercy, a testament to the unbreakable bond between those who serve. And on every clear night in Lincoln, Maine, when the lights of the town go dark, the bronze sniper stands silently, a reminder that freedom is not free, and that some debts can never be fully repaid, only remembered with honor